Hello, hello. Good morning, everybody. If we want to take a seat, we'll go ahead and get started for the last day of the 50th Annual National Solar Conference. We made it. It's been an awesome week. I'm so appreciative to all of you. Thank you. So thankful for your presence. So glad we got to get together this week. As you know, I'm Carly Cipolla, the director of the conference and the director of operations for ASES. Thank you. And I want to go ahead and get started this morning for our final closing keynote by introducing senior instructor at the University of Colorado Boulder in the Environmental Studies Department and our conference chair, Dale Miller. Please join me in welcoming to the stage, Dale.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I love that when people actually respond to that. How are you today? I got this from the green people that were here, remember, on Wednesday night when they have the talk back, whatever they call that thing. Good morning. Amory, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to do your introduction here and then we will move right into yours. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks, Carly, for the nice introduction and everyone else for the reception. I have had a terrific time. This is, as it happened, not the first conference that I have chaired, and it's my favorite. You guys are my favorite. So I have the pleasure and honor of introducing our final speaker, Amory Lovins. I've written. Yes, indeed. I'm going to read a little bit of what we have here. So he sent me a biography, and I edited it. I hope he likes it. So physicist Amory Lovins is an adjunct professor of civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University and co-founder and chairman of emeritus of RMI, where he continues to collaborate. He is the author of 31 books and 750 papers. Whew. And he has integrated designed many super buildings, vehicles, and industrial plants. And since 1973, has advised major governments and firms worldwide on advanced energy efficiency, renewables, integration, and strategy. I think he fits right in here. Amory has received, it's a long list here, hang in. Amory has received the Blue Planet, Volvo, Zayed, Onassis, Nissan, Shingo, and Mitchell Prizes, MacArthur and Ashaka Fellowships, 12 honorary doctorates, 12. The Heinz Lindbergh Right Livelihood National Design and World Technology Awards, and Germany's highest civilian honor. Like other notable changemakers who dropped out of college but doubling their efforts, Amory is both a Harvard and Oxford dropout. He works twice as little. Yet, he is a former Oxford Don, and by that I mean that means a lecturer and not Quixote. He's also an honorary U.S. architect, a Swedish engineering academician, and a 2011 to 18 member of the National Petroleum Council. Amory bridges numerous disciplines and has taught at 10 universities, teaching only subjects he hasn't formally studied. Which I love also because you can be an expert in things you haven't formally studied in those ways to help cultivate the beginner's mind. I love that because that's really the way to get in there. His 1976 Foreign Affairs article, Energy Strategy, The road not taken launched the revolution in energy efficiency and renewables. And I skipped this, but he was also in 2009, he was named Times one of the world's 100 most influential people. And Foreign Policy named him one of the 100 top global thinkers. That's, out of, 8 billion? That's pretty good. It'd be better if it was top 50. We are delighted and honored to have Amory here, and please welcome Amory Lovins.
Thank you very much, Dale. Let me see if I can get this going. Okay, then we're off and running.
Perfect.
And thank you all for the honor of reporting some energy and electricity surprises that I hope will help put your good work into a broader context. I'm going to take your General Eisenhower's wise advice to make tough problems soluble by expanding their boundaries to encompass more options and more synergies, so they include what the solution requires. All four energy-using sectors, transport, buildings, industry, and electricity, save more energy faster together than separately. All four kinds of innovation, not just technology, but also design, not only public policy, but also new business strategy, can combine to create deeply disruptive game changers while the old industries are still putting on their boots. Ford's auto industry, Edison's electricity industry, and Rockefeller's oil industry changed the world. If Ford and Edison took a very long nap on one of their car camping holidays together and then woke up and saw their businesses today, they would recognize almost everything except the electronics. Yet their industries now face vast disruptions as 21st century technology and speed collide head-on with 20th and even 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. And now the first two of those three great industries, autos and electricity, are coming together to eat the third one, oil, and then gas. As we might imagine, Ford mischievously muttering to Edison, "Let's see what happens when electricity displaces gasoline. Then those electric cars add flexibility and cheap distributed storage and make batteries cheap for all, helping the grid integrate variable solar and wind power so distributed renewables replace giant power plants and their fossil fuels." The story starts, as it always should, with efficient energy use. In the past 45 years, saved energy, about 2/3 due to smarter technologies, has dropped U.S. energy use by 60%. Renewables, meanwhile, doubled, but with 27 times less cumulative impact so far. Who knew? Renewables get virtually all the headlines because they're visible, but energy is invisible, and the energy you don't use is almost unimaginable. Most climate models still call for costly and speculative technologies to capture carbon from combustion or from thin air, but wouldn't need those if efficient use were competed or compared with supply. Another bit of history. Around 1975, US government and industry all said that primary energy productivity, the GDP produced per unit of primary energy used, could never rise. A year later, I heretically suggested in Foreign Affairs that it could rise 257% in 50 years. So far, it's risen 152% in 50 years. In 45 years, 5 ago. Yet, just the innovations already added by 2010 can raise energy productivity by another threefold, twice what I originally thought, and at a third the real cost. Today, that's looking conservative, because optimizing buildings, vehicles, and factories as whole systems, not as piles of parts, can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into increasing returns. This paper, free online with a fun 4-minute video abstract, explains why making energy savings several-fold bigger can actually cost less, because it uses not more but fewer devices, and not fancier but simpler devices, more artfully chosen, combined, timed, and sequenced. Such savings often get cheaper as we save more. That's the opposite of mineral resources. Oil reservoirs and metal ore bodies are finite and depletable assemblages of atoms. In contrast, energy efficiency resources are infinitely expandable assemblages of ideas, depleting only stupidity, a very abundant resource. A few examples. My wife Judy and I live here, 2,200 meters up in the Rockies in Old Snowmass near Aspen, Colorado, where temperatures used to dip to minus 44 Celsius, and we've seen 39 days of continuous midwinter cloud. But our house does no combustion. That's so 20th century. Super insulation, ventilation, heat recovery, and big super windows insulating like 16 to 22 sheets of glass, looking like 2, costing less than 3, make the building 99% passive solar heated, 1% active solar. Super efficiency added less construction cost than eliminating the heating system subtracted. So we save 99% of space and water heating energy, 90% of household electricity, and half the water, all with a 10-month payback in 1983. Today's technologies are better and cheaper. The central atrium, inspired by the Balcombs in Santa Fe, seen here in a February snowstorm, or a bit of it behind me in the photo, has so far produced 79 passive solar banana crops. Our house helped inspire several 100,000 European passive buildings that likewise have no heating and roughly normal construction cost. An analogous approach works well in the opposite climate, muggy, broiling Bangkok. Wherever you live, though, integrative design gives many benefits from each expenditure. So the white arch you see behind me, or in the top of the upper middle photo, has 12 functions, but it has only one cost. We used such integrative design in 2010 to retrofit the Empire State Building, saving 38% of its energy, later 43%, with a 3-year payback. 3 years later, our cost-effective Denver retrofit saved 70%, making the half-century-old Byron Rogers Federal Complex more efficient than what was then the best new U.S. office at NREL, which in turn is only a third as efficient as RMI's passive net positive no mechanicals innovation center 10 minutes from here in Basalt, Colorado. Now there's a Bavarian building using 2/5 less energy than RMI's. Yet all these technologies existed over a decade ago. What's mainly improved is not so much technology as design. How did that retrofit save 2/5 of the Empire State Building's energy? Well, remanufacturing its 6,514 windows on site in a temporary window factory set up on a vacant floor into super windows that pass light but block heat, plus better lights, office equipment, air handling units, and so on, cut the maximum cooling load by a third. Then renovating smaller chillers instead of adding bigger chillers saved $17 million of capital costs, paying for most of those improvements and cutting the payback to 3 years, or under 1 year if we counted non-energy benefits to the owner or the tenants. A big energy service company using disintegrated design had offered the same 3-year payback, but with only 1/6 the savings we got, so they lost the bid. Now the owner is going back with even better integrative design to save another 40+%. In Europe, industrializing mass retrofits to net zero energy and streamlining their finance and soft costs is now getting cheap enough to finance entirely from saved energy, while extending building life and improving amenity, health, and value. Now, this whole retrofit, putting a factory customized tea cozy around your house, dropping in an efficient heat pump, HVAC core, and craning in a well-insulated photovoltaic roof, has even been demonstrated to be installable in a single day while you're off at work. Now, similar methods are expected to cut energy costs 80% in 9 old Brooklyn apartment buildings, and RMI's realized collaboration with DOE and the California Energy Commission is adapting them to the United States. Whatever exists is possible. IPCC reported 7 years ago that among European new buildings on the left and retrofits on the right, with bigger savings in both graphs toward the right side, the best projects those near the horizontal axis, saved up to at least 90% of their energy without costing more per unit of saved energy. Many projects did cost far more by not adopting the best practices shown. The difference is a business opportunity. And about a decade after those buildings, new techniques are emerging. Next, for example, we can eliminate refrigerative air conditioning. In this shaded pavilion, Singaporeans stayed comfortable outdoors without cooling, drying, or moving the hot, humid, still air. At 32 Celsius, that's 90 F, and 80% relative humidity, their body's far infrared radiation was absorbed by panels shielded by a thin plastic film and cooled by 23 to 25 degrees Celsius water. Special selectively radiated roof surfaces can now cool that water that much passively, even in full sunlight, using no electricity. Some assembly required. Inside a building, this Swiss fist-sized heat pump can deliver 6 to 15 units of hot water per unit of electricity. And this dramatically more efficient, safe, and otherwise superior Swiss electric cooking system uses vacuum-insulated pots to cook with 2.5 to 4 odd times more, less electricity than induction cooktops use. The highest leverage for fair development comes from efficiency gains that make electricity affordable to the poor. In this 27-watt electric household, Amofatka's group at Berkeley Lab uses PVs a third smaller than the one shown to power 7,000 lux of LED lights, a mobile phone charger, a clock radio, a table fan, and a 56-centimeter color television. Of course, the technologies keep improving. The latest biomimetic fan can move a well-collimated beam of air at 650 CFM, 307 liters per second, with just 6.2 watts. Super high efficiencies cut total capital costs by half, empowering twice as many off-grid families for the same money and enabling cheap and highly reliable DC solar microgrids, with PVs, batteries, and appliances all running on the same low-voltage DC with no inverters. And this eliminates so many back-and-forth AC-DC conversion losses that it nearly doubles the practical system efficiency. And if you invest to make things that save electricity rather than supplying more, you'll need roughly 1,000-fold less capital and get it back 10 times faster. Lower intensity times faster velocity, when they multiply, means you need about 10,000 times less capital for the most capital-intensive sector, electricity, which devours about a fourth of global development capital. Freeing up that capital to fund other development needs is the biggest macroeconomic lever we know for global development. Just buy negawatts whenever they're cheaper than megawatts and reward providers for cutting customers' bills, not selling them more energy. Renewables can then take over supplying reduced global needs sooner, cheaper, and more easily. Industry uses half the world's energy and electricity, but RMI's latest $50-odd billion worth of industrial retrofit redesigns typically found 30 to 60% energy savings, paying back in a few years, and far outperforming the brown zone in the upper left, where most energy service companies deliver disintegrated design. Our new build industrial projects generally found 40 to 90+% savings with lower than normal capital cost. To see how, let's start with pumping, the biggest use of motors. If your roughly 100,000 kilometers of fractal blood vessels had the design and friction of standard industrial piping, you would need a heart bigger than your body. Very inconvenient. But in fact, your third of a kilogram, 1.5 watt heart suffices because your blood follows nature's standard design, laminar vortex flow, with 1/10 the friction of industrial piping. Just better pipe and duct design, saving 80 to 90% of friction, and therefore pump and fan power, could, if fully deployed, save roughly half the world's coal-fired electricity, or a fifth of all electricity, with paybacks typically under a year in retrofit and instant in new build. But this isn't yet in any standard industrial textbook, government study, industry forecast, or climate model. Why not? Because it's not a technology, it's a design method. And few people yet think of design as a scaling vector, a way to make things big fast. To wring out friction, we simply use big pipes and small pumps, not small pipes and big pumps. And to eliminate elbows and their friction, we lay out the pipes first, then the equipment, laying out supply pipes as if they were drains. We bend minds, not pipes. What does such savings mean for the 3/5 of global electricity that's used in motors, half to run pumps and fans? Well, in a typical pumping system, from the fuel burn to the thermal power plant to the end use, many successive losses compound, so only a tenth of the energy in the fuel comes out the pipe as flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards into compounding savings from right to left, and every unit of flow or friction you save in the pipe saves 10 units of fuel cost emissions and what Hunter Lovins calls global weirding back at the power plant. And as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper, so the total capital cost goes down. Then we can make the drive systems 80 or 90% smaller and at least twice as efficient by a whole system retrofit, using not just the usual 2 improvements, but 35, of which 28 are free byproducts of the first 7. So you save several-fold more drive system energy at about a fifth the unit cost. Industry mainly makes energy-intensive materials, yet building's half of cement and a third of steel is largely wasted by inefficient structural design. Tension structures can save about 80 or 90%. Pouring concrete beams into curving fabric forms rather than rigid prismatic forms saves half. Concrete bridges support mainly their own weight, but 3D printing an airy dendritic structure supports mainly payload. Corrugating a thin concrete floor slab can save 3/4 of its weight, which is half the weight of a mid or high-rise building, plus supporting structures. And then you can fit 3 stories with unchanged ceiling height into the vertical space of 2. New cement chemistries, steel made with stunningly cheap green hydrogen, and other cleaner materials will win on lower cost and be deployable sooner as demand moderates. The extra electricity needed to decarbonize industrial heat, directly or via hydrogen or ammonia, can come from the extra solar and wind capacity built to ensure reliable power in the worst conditions. With its capacity paid for and its operating costs tiny, that cheap extra power available most of the time turns what grid-centric people call overcapacity to be curtailed into a highly competitive source of hydrogen and ammonia to decarbonize industry and transport. So you need to consider the whole economy, not just the grid. But how much electricity will we need? Well, RMI rigorously showed a decade ago in a synthesis I'll describe later called Reinventing Fire, that U.S. electricity use could shrink 25% by 2050, despite all electric automobiles, a 2.6-fold bigger GDP, and 82 to 86% lower carbon emissions. That vast overhang of unbought efficiency holds at risk many power plant, fuel, and grid investments, free stranded assets. Yet quadrupling electric efficiency would cost just a tenth our current retail price of the electricity we're saving. So we didn't buy nearly enough efficiency in that analysis, and we didn't even count most of the integrative design potential. By assuming far lower efficiency, Princeton's Net Zero America study assumes 2 to 4 times higher 2050 electricity demand than we found, creating impressively granular challenges around transmission and land use and so on, by not competing or comparing efficient use with increasing supply. Nearly all global projections do the same thing. So we don't really yet know whether long-term world electricity use will be about flat or maybe even drop a bit, or will modestly rise in a least-cost decarbonized economy. But the many studies assuming 3 to 6-fold increase in demand merit skepticism, and I wouldn't bet your company on their coming true. Conversely, it now looks possible to decongest grid bottlenecks far faster than we thought at a negative cost. The electricity needed by electric vehicles, too, depends on their efficiency, but that varies widely, and it can vary even more if we take out more weight and drag. 2/3 of the energy needed to move a typical car is caused by its weight, but up to 70% of the weight can be safely and economically saved by advanced materials and integrative design. As an initial example, BMW's carbon fiber electric car that I drive saved 250 to 350 kilograms, offsetting the added weight of its electric powertrain by making its whole passenger cell out of supposedly way too costly carbon fiber, but without adding cost. How? Well, this i3 made money from the first unit off the assembly line in 2013 because its carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries to move less weight. Fewer batteries also recharge faster. Integrative design makes saved weight snowball far more than other automakers assume. Assembly is radically frugal, eliminates conventional body and paint shops, the two hardest and costliest steps in making a car, and it's much better for workers. So the quadrupled efficiency is uncompromised, it brings many driver benefits, and it's at competitive price. In April, Bloomberg NEF reported that China's flagship cars aim to shed 79% of their steel by 2030 and add enough carbon fiber to make the body. Such ultralight electric cars would need far less electricity than standard forecasts assume. Two hypercars plan to enter the market late this year, both from firms I advise, get another 2 or 3-fold more efficient than even a Tesla Model 3, which I also drive. Most drivers will not need to recharge this 2-seat electric three-wheeler because its topside photovoltaics capture enough energy to drive upwards of 40 miles a day at the equivalent of 343 miles a gallon. It's as if your present car magically added a couple of gallons of fuel to its tank each day you park it outside. To make a long road trip, you can quickly recharge the tiny batteries with household electricity for ranges up to 8,000 miles. The composite body looks very crashworthy. Dutch firm Lightyear's 5-seat four-wheel, 725-kilometer range light aerodynamic car has 5 square meters of solar cells instead of 3, 251 miles per gallon equivalent efficiency. So it can add 12 kilometers of range for every hour in the sun. And therefore, the charging infrastructure that other automakers or users would have to pay for, these super efficient vehicles aim to bypass. The same design principles apply to heavy vehicles. My team helped Walmart's fleet of heavy trucks, the world's biggest civilian fleet, save half its fuel per case in a decade, including smarter logistics. But better technology alone can profitably make heavy trucks at least 3 times more efficient, as one maker expects to prove this year. Airplane efficiency, too, can rise 3 to 5-fold like these decade-old designs by Boeing, NASA, and MIT. But technology moves on. Tesla's battery electric heavy truck more than triples efficiency with 40% sleeker aerodynamics, lightweighting that offsets battery weight, and a 2-year payback. And this flight-tested air taxi revealed a year ago could fly nonstop from, say, Dallas to Berlin or Aspen to London with a sixth of business jet's operating cost and 1/8 its fuel use, even before electrification. A bigger version already designed could hold well over 20 seats and looks set to blow up aviation's business models. So the oil and gas reserves, unsellable for competitive reasons, look bigger now than the reserves unburnable for climate reasons, putting oil owners even more at risk from market competition than from climate regulation. The cost of getting autos completely off oil has fallen from $18 per saved barrel 10 years ago to under $7 today, heading below zero in the next few years. So oil became uncompetitive even at low prices before it became unavailable even at high prices. As with fuels, so with electricity. Technology and design are both moving efficiency into fast forward. Prior lighting improvements, for example, are being swept away as LEDs in each decade get 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, 10 times cheaper. And they save about 1/8 of the world's electricity when fully rolled out. Then they'll pry open an old crack in electricity's business model. See, Thomas Edison didn't sell electricity, he sold light. So future lighting efficiency would cut his costs and raise his profits. But in 1892, utilities switched to selling kilowatt hours, so efficient use cuts their revenues, not their costs. Utilities sell a commodity, but customers want an infrastructure or a service like hot showers and cold beer. Oil and gas companies use the same flawed business model, selling molecules, not services like comfort and mobility. You might ask, what else changes this fast? Well, the rest of the energy transformation, modern renewables. LEDs backwards are PVs. PV and an aqua wind power costs have plunged below the dash lines the cost of fossil fuels fed into U.S. thermal power stations, often making old coal, gas, and nuclear plants uneconomic just to run. But the electricity transformation is much bigger than just cost competition. This revolution includes shifting from molecules and atoms to bits and packets, from hardware to software, from hierarchies to networks. It's shifting to decarbonized, decentralized, digital, democratized. Electricity is changing from centralized, supply-focused, uranium and fossil-fueled and brittle to distributed, customer-focused, renewable, and resilient. And the information age informs, enables, and organizes customers to take power into their own hands. It's wise to sell customers what they want before someone else does. Customers are figuring out they can buy fewer electrons, use them more productively and timely, produce their own, and even trade them with each other. For example, Dutch customers can buy renewable electricity directly from other customers on this peer-to-peer website of Van de Bron, literally from the source. My friend bought his electricity from the guy in the upper left photo because the price was right in magenta, and it's a really cute piglet. Then he got a long handwritten Christmas card from his electricity supplier. What big utility can dream of such customer intimacy? Indeed, powerful disruptors are converging on the electricity industry from at least 8 directions. And these 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse move fast. They don't just add, they exponentiate. They're not lone wolves, they hunt in packs, they multiply quickly, they can gobble up half of utility revenues in this decade. And together they're creating an alien competitive landscape faster than most utility cultures can cope. 7 years ago, all central power plants were called dinosaurs, and the full quote is, "Too big, too inflexible, not even relevant for backup power in the long run." Who said that? It wasn't Greenpeace, it was Union Bank of Switzerland. And now there's a whole new wave of Pac-Men coming over the hill with more behind them. Renewables in 2020 were 90% of the world's total net additions of generating capacity. And the International Energy Agency predicts about 95% through 2025 because, says Bloomberg, last year, renewables became the cheapest bulk power source in 90% of the world, soon in all. U.S. wholesale electricity prices now widely exceed the average contract prices of wind and photovoltaics, which are temporarily subsidized but less than the non-renewables are. In unsubsidized world markets, renewables at or below $30 a megawatt hour, the diamonds, keep falling through 20. In Saudi Arabia, they've already hit 10. Modern batteries included in the filled squares are already cheaper than gas peakers. Bloomberg finds variable renewables plus backup, which can be renewable, non-renewable storage, or demand side, are now the cheapest way to meet a steady load, dethroning so-called baseload thermal plants, which no longer have a need or a business case. The Paris Agreement's 1.5 Celsius aspirational goal would require stopping 80% of 2010 coal plants by 2030, closing 1 a day to 2040, and virtually all by 2050. But renewables' new market prices now make this profitable without counting mitigation benefits. This mid-2020 study examined 95% of the global fleet and found that using efficiently structured financial instruments to close and replace all coal plants now with modern renewables, including battery storage, would be cost neutral in 2 years and would save over $100 billion a year by 2025. This turns out to be most true in India and China. Gas comes next. Old and new combined cycle plants no longer have a business case, even with frac gas. Their market is collapsing because all of their outputs, energy, capacity, ramping and flexibility, and ancillary services like voltage and frequency stability, can now be provided cheaper, better, faster by locally customized carbon-free clean energy portfolios that combine demand-side renewable and storage assets. This could strand over $100 billion of planned U.S. gas plants and $500 billion of gas supply to fuel them. Investors quickly took note. Modern renewables also scale up in a fundamentally different way. Traditionally we built giant cathedral-like thermal power plants, each costing billions, taking many years to license and build. But now each year, similar investment can build you a factory that produces each year thereafter enough solar cells to generate each year thereafter as much electricity as your cathedral will ultimately make. So looking at the upper corners here, you see after just 10 years of this thought experiment, cumulative output is 15 times greater for solar power, which worldwide has thus been scaling faster than cell phones. And yet we're still told that only coal, gas, and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, while wind power and PVs are variable and hence unreliable. But variable doesn't mean unpredictable. Here's how accurately the French grid operator in one stormy winter month forecast a day ahead the actual output of the country's wind farms. I'll bet they wish they could forecast demand that accurately. A decade later, East Danish
Amory?
Yeah.
Can I ask you to hold on 1 second? We've got a little Zoom blip on our end over here.
Want me to go back at all?
Yeah, just a couple of slides if you can. All right, Amory, we are ready to rock and roll here again.
Okay.
Thank
So
you.
let me get back to the point that we're often told that only coal, gas, and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, while wind power and PVs are variable or often miscalled intermittent and hence unreliable. But variable doesn't mean unpredictable. Here was the French grid operator's forecast in a stormy winter month of the output of the nation's wind farms next day compared with the actual output. And it would be nice if they could forecast demand that accurately. Now, a decade later, the East Danish wind operators today are bidding wind power into the day-ahead hourly auctions, just like thermal capacity, because today's wind forecasting is so accurate that the operators are more confident they can deliver on their contract at 3 tomorrow afternoon than the grid operators are that if they push the button, their peaker will actually start. Indeed, we built the grid because no generator is 24/7. They all break. When a giant plant fails, you lose 1 billion watts in milliseconds, often abruptly for weeks or months. Grids manage this intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, grids can manage the forecastable variations of wind and solar power by backing up those variable renewables with a portfolio of other renewables, all forecasted, integrated, and diversified by type and by location. So in Texas, whose grid has no big hydro dams and is only 1% interconnected to adjacent grids, a 2050 summer weeks expected load shape can get much smaller and less peaky with profitably efficient use. Then we can make 86% of the annual electricity with a combination of wind and photovoltaics. Yes, they are variable. And the other 14% from dispatchable renewables. This 100% renewable supply can then match the load by putting surplus electricity into two kinds of distributed storage worth buying anyway: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart charging of electric autos, and then recovering that energy when needed and filling the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. So by putting the moving parts together in this way, you have 100% renewable electricity every hour of the year with no bulk storage and with only about 5% left over to make hydrogen or ammonia. So the economics should be excellent even at today's prices. Some grid operators already do such choreography to far exceed last year's 38% renewable fraction in Europe and about 30% in the world. Germany and Britain are half renewably powered. Denmark expects to be 86% this year. Scotland 100, almost made it last year. Already they and some other European countries with modest or no hydropower meet about half to three-fourths or more of their annual electricity needs from renewables. Yet they added no bulk storage and have superior reliability. For Denmark and West Germany, 20 or 25 times ours. The ultra-reliable former East German utility 50 Hertz was 60% wind and solar powered in 2019, and now targets 100% renewables, all reliably integrated by 2032. So as my colleague Clay Stranger says, the operators have learned to run these grids the way a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously makes beautiful music. Much new PV power is installed today with batteries at attractive costs, but batteries have competitors. For normal grid balancing, we have not just one-way bulk storage in magenta, but about 10 carbon-free ways to make the grid flexible, reliable, and renewable, sketched here in rough order of increasing costs. Your actual costs will vary, but bulk storage comes last, not first, so we needn't wait for a storage miracle, though some are emerging, and the market isn't waiting. For example, let's look more closely at just the second box from the left, demand response, using electricity more timely. RMI's hourly simulation for the ERCOT system, the Texas grid, in summer 2050, systematically combined 8 kinds of demand response that add up to about 3 times more than previously assumed, engaging electric vehicles, home plug loads, residential, commercial, domestic hot water, plus heating and cooling controls. And together, these can conveniently cut in half ERCOT's summer daily load range, save a fourth of non-renewable capacity, make renewable energy a third more valuable, and pay back in about 5 months. This hints at how the models that claim renewable growth will devalue itself out of the market are overlooking or prohibiting from the model important remedies. Meanwhile, as promised in my initial Ford and Edison slide, electric automobile sales are soaring as battery costs plummet. Each trend drives the other. In the next few years, electric cars will cost no more to buy than gasoline cars, and good EVs are much nicer and cheaper to drive. Their abundant cheap batteries imply distributed solar everywhere, gas industry distress, the end of thermal power plants, vast distributed storage and demand flexibility, and perhaps much of the grid's becoming a stranded asset like phone company copper. This prospect gives utility executives nightmares and venture capitalists sweet dreams. Ubiquitous electric vehicles mean an immense storage and ancillary services resource that's now parked 96% of the time. You can already drive your charged up battery car to a soccer game in Amsterdam's Green Stadium, plug it in to help run the stadium, leaving ample juice to get home with, and watch the game for free. The integrator, the Zurich-based Mobility House, supplements those incoming cars with stationary Nissan Leaf battery packs, many reincarnated for a second life, and all providing valuable services to the grid. The firm is building a 100 megawatt portfolio of stationary storage in Germany, Holland, and France. Here's the first 30 megawatts, all using packs that are in the EV business, but not in currently driving cars. In 2018, the first electric car was approved as a power plant on the German grid, licensed and able to get paid for, providing frequency stabilization services. And of 21 services that stationary or mobile batteries can provide to the grid, the Mobility House is now selling 13. And now Électricité de France's U.S. subsidiary is building its strategy around vehicle-to-grid integration, not just smart charging. Meanwhile, efficient and electric autos are morphing from PIGs, that is, personal internal combustion gasoline steel-dominated vehicles, to SEALs, shareable electric autonomous lightweight service vehicles. Those 2 changes in technology and 3 in business model are all simultaneous, mutually reinforcing, vigorously in play, and sped by smart policies and strong commercial ambitions in India and China. Assembling all these opportunities, our 2011 business and design book, Reinventing Fire, rigorously showed how to triple U.S. energy efficiency and quintuple renewables by 2050, needing then no oil, coal, or nuclear energy, and at least a third less natural gas, while saving $5 trillion in net present value, growing the economy 2.6-fold, strengthening national security, and cutting fossil carbon emissions 82 to 86%, yet needing no new inventions or acts of Congress, but with smart city and state policies led by business for profit. How are we doing? Well, the first 9 years of this 40-year journey are pretty well on track, green actual versus blue proposed, largely, I think, because the private sector smells the $5 trillion on the table. That's exactly what should be happening. These best buys are also the most effective solutions to the big global problems that hazard every country's security and prosperity. And if you like any of Reinventing Fire's outcomes, you could support this transition without having to like every outcome or agree about which outcome is most important. Focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn gridlock and conflict into a unifying solution to our common energy challenge. And of course, as we build distributed resources, especially PVs, our default design should work with or without the grid, building resilience from the bottom up, one roof at a time, and making auto-islanding, safe for the line workers, the universal practice per IEEE 1547. Stimulated by those U.S. findings, at the G20 5 years ago, China's National Development and Reform Commission published its roadmap for China's energy revolution, now in 5 volumes in Chinese, and it details how China can save over $3 trillion, run a 7-fold bigger economy in 2050 than 2010, but using today's energy 7 times more productively, emit 42% less carbon, burn 80% less coal, and get 13 times more GDP from each ton of fossil carbon. This roadmap strongly informed the 13th five-year plan, whose energy authors were our steering committee, and that strategy continues so firmly that China doubled its renewable installations last year alone, adding more wind power in 2020 than the whole world added a year earlier. In fact, China alone was responsible for over 80% of the increase in global renewable additions from 2019 to 2020. Now, extrapolating these on-track US and adopted Chinese and similar European findings to the other half of the world could achieve the minimal Paris Agreement ambition, 2-degree climate target, about $18 trillion cheaper. Reinvesting some of that in natural systems carbon removal could then get us to the aspirational and necessary 1.5 degrees, with trillions of dollars left over and huge progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. Making climate protection not costly but profitable should also simplify the politics. You know, climate science models have conservatively understated the speed and the runaway potential of climate change. Climate policy models conservatively understated what we can do to stop climate change. Offsetting these two biases, what Jeremy Grantham calls the race of our lives is very much on. Despair and complacency are equally unwarranted. Global CO2 emissions were flat in 3 of the 5 years, 2015 to 19, as energy savings and carbon-free supply growth averaged roughly the pace we must sustain for 2 degrees, or half the pace needed for 1.5 degrees. So now we must accelerate, and a powerful tool is capital market dynamics. Incumbent energy suppliers feeling competitive threats understandably focus on the need for price to exceed cost. But many forget the other part of the business condition, that value must exceed price. If competitors offer a superior value proposition and run off with your revenues, it doesn't matter if you can profitably sell what your ex-customers are no longer buying. These energy transformations can flip markets with breathtaking speed. On Manhattan's Fifth Avenue, in 1900, you have to look hard for the first car. 13 years later, you have to look even harder for the last horse. The horse and buggy industry thought it would have many decades to adapt, but Ford's Model T got 62% cheaper in 13 years. Car-owning households soared from 8 to about 60% in a decade. three-quarters financed by a GM and DuPont innovation called car loans. Well, today our PV modules just got 80% cheaper in 5 years. Batteries got 89% cheaper in 10 years. Three-quarters of our rooftop solar is innovatively financed. Ford's and Edison's industries are merging to eat Rockefeller's industry. Horse and buggy thinking is dangerous, but still common. As the late ex-oilman Maurice Strong said, not all the fossils are in the fuel. But DuPont's ex-chairman Edgar Woolard reminds us that firms hampered by old thinking won't be a problem, he said, because they simply won't be around long term. Thus, the pace of transformation is set not by incumbents, but by insurgents, who are not inhibited by incumbents' business models, legacy assets, or cultures. Moreover, investors flee before customers do because capital markets keenly sniff out disruption. And once they think you're in or even headed for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they decapitalize you and invest in your successors. Already, trillions of dollars have prudently fled the fossil fuel industry as it hemorrhages capital, talent, and political influence. The world's top 16 listed hydrocarbon companies combined were recently worth less than Apple. Carbon Tracker investment analyst Kingsmill Bond explains the capital market's brutal logic. He says any fast-growing challenger will rapidly take all the growth in a slow-growing market. As a rule of thumb, incumbent sales will peak when the challenger gets to around 3% market share, as in these examples. That's because most investors seek growth, not mere size, so they try to sell just before sales peak. Stagnation strands assets and competition drops prices. That's why the coal industry has lost three-quarters of its market value globally, 99% in the US. But now this collapsing value is spreading to oil and coming next for gas. Peak nuclear power, peak coal, peak auto sales, peak fossil fuel power have already happened. Fueled autos are now in their fourth year of shrinking sales because electric cars took more than all the growth. Last year, global plug-in auto sales soared 43%, while total auto sales fell 14%. The IEA says last year's pandemic slump undid energy's and CO2's previous 4 and 9 years of growth, while renewables grew 45% faster, adding an extraordinary 278 gigawatts. So by the time and to the extent demand recovers, renewables will probably have expanded enough to supply any future growth, tipping fossil fuels into permanent decline. Therefore, it is quite possible that peak oil, peak fossil fuels, and peak CO2 emissions all happened in 2019. And here's what that can look like in a respected recent forecast. The bottom three wedges, coal in black, oil in red, gas in gray, stagnated before the pandemic. Last year, the pandemic's economic shock shriveled fossil fuels, while renewables, mainly wind in blue and solar in yellow, grabbed the capital. Today, the total energy use, if you look out into the 2030s or so, may still rise a little, but wind and solar supply can handle more than all the growth. So investors are rapidly shifting their capital to both efficiency and renewables. Efficient use makes renewables gain share faster. Efficiency outcompetes fossil fuels sooner. They reinforce each other. In the past decade, world energy use grew only half as fast as in the previous decade. Further speeding energy savings could accelerate the self-reinforcing capital flight from incumbents to insurgents. Some of that speed may come from deeper, cheaper energy savings through integrative design. Its contagious, visually transmissible ideas might spread at the speed of YouTube and Twitter, perhaps rivaling even the speed of scaling solar power, and certainly helping solar take over faster. One last thought. This global energy transformation isn't just fundamental, it's elemental. The first industrial revolution was the age of carbon, creating our prosperity and the world's mightiest industries, from coal and oil and gas. But now that obsolete age of carbon is giving way to the modern age of silicon. Silicon microchips, telecoms, and software turn people from isolated to networked, systems from dumb to smart, grids from analog to digital, and potentially from dirigist to democratized. Silicon power electronics make electricity interconvertible and precisely applicable, replacing fiery molecules with obedient electrons. And silicon solar cells enable the ascent of energy from mining the fires of hell to harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. So our responsibility and our opportunity is to help enable the new energy system, not protect the old, to build back better, to move fast and fix things, so the global energy transformation can move at the pace and cost of design and of software, not of infrastructure, and can be not constrained by the inertia of incumbents, but sped by the ambition of insurgents, like many of you. Thank you all for your wonderful work and your kind attention.